Welcome to the Data Scientist Podcast with Dr. Stylianos Kampakis. Dr. Kampakis is a data scientist, statistician, and blockchain expert with a mission to educate the public about the wonderful capabilities of technologies like AI, data science, and DLTs. These technologies have the potential to transform the world, the economy, and our lives. However, there is too much misinformation around tech, and so most people are just confused about what is true and what is not. Whether you are a CEO, an entrepreneur, or just an enthusiast, the Data Scientist Podcast helps you separate reality from hype.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Scientist Podcast. I'm very happy to have here with us today Uthman Ali, who is a leader in the space of AI ethics. And on today's episode, we're going to discuss about the current state of the art in AI ethics and what are the implications of AI in our society and the economy in general. Hi, Uthman. Welcome to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words about the work you've been doing?
Hi, everyone. My name's Uthman. And I've been in AI ethics for a few years now, but working at major in the corporate setting before as in academia. But my background is actually in law, specifically human rights law. And when I was studying law, something that kept coming up was like the advances in AI and sort of our relationship with technology. Particularly autonomous vehicles at the time was the big one. And I thought, okay, right, autonomous vehicles bring new issues around like privacy, surveillance, potentially job displacement, even human-robot interaction. And I thought, okay, the world's probably going to need a lawyer that knows about like AI, how it works, robotics and ethics, because naturally ethics precedes the law. So I was like, hey, there'll be probably companies that will need someone to understand AI ethics, but then it'll become regulated activity. So I've been working in the industry for a few years now, but before that as well, I was also in fintech, where again, AI was being used quite a lot. And I was involved in some sandbox testing environments to look at AI ethics as well. And that's sort of how I've ended up in this field. And it's amazing to see how much it's really exploded, particularly with ChatGPT, whereas before this was sort of a fringe thing that some companies may have had someone. You heard that like we're building like the small community around the world of people doing this in industry. But I think it was ChatGPT that really just changed everything, where industry realized it's not just a nice to have, like this is a necessity for like the future of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think since ChatGPT came about, the progress in this space has been extremely rapid. So that for me is fascinating. However, that being said, while ChatGPT has raised awareness about the importance of AI ethics, what's your feeling about large language models? Because I think many people, they confuse AI with large language models, and I guess that's only part of the big picture around AI as well, AI ethics. I believe that some of the work that you were doing, you started well before ChatGPT was around. So I'm pretty sure you had to tackle some and look into some issues which do not necessarily relate to natural language.
Yeah, for sure. So like ChatGPT and LLMs, sort of the real thing why this exploded was just the accessibility, right? It was like this thing just looked like a search engine, seemed to work like it, but it just gave you the answer instead of the links. And then people are like, okay, this is what AI is. Yeah. But even before, like we've had traditional machine learning and deep learning for like a number of years now. But even something I specialized in before was actually the ethics of things like brain-computer interfaces and more frontier ethical issues with digital. But there's been like a number of issues with AI ethics even before ChatGPT. But I think this is just one, like LLMs, because of just how easy it is to use, that it's just made it for people can relate to it more. Like if an LLM gives you misinformation, people go, oh, okay, I can see how this could be bad for society. Whereas before, AI was seen as this abstract thing, and people would think of like iRobot and sci-fi stuff, right? They wouldn't think of like a search algorithm and a search engine being powered by AI.
Yeah, exactly. And so what do you think are like the main issues that are being discussed now in the different sectors? I guess each sector must have its own, challenges. For example, the medical sector is different, let's say, to, the retail. But in general, do you see some kind of overarching theme?
I think the common theme, particularly sort of before ChatGPT was, just LLMs was kind of like the most common failure modes. So there's some great work done by Oxford where they highlight like the most common AI failures. And it's usually privacy, bias, or explainability. Even with the rise of Gen AI, now we're seeing things like misinformation, deepfakes, disinformation proliferating a lot more. Now even questions around job displacement. but also it's becoming a lot more psychological in nature too. Things like attachment and dependency on AI, how it can impact people's well-being, and even the environmental impact as well. Like, this is something that's definitely a big concern now as well.
Yeah, so regarding fake news, I think I have this theory that maybe because content generation is going to, become very easy through the use of AI, and we're already seeing this, a lot of AI generated content. Maybe we're going to witness a transition more towards traditional media formats, as in things like, let's say, for media which produce facts that are easier for someone to verify themselves. So, okay, this might sound a bit cryptic, but where I'm going with this is like, let's say, for example, that you're actually able to witness some kind of event happening live, and the other witnesses saying, yeah, this actually happened. I don't know, if there was some kind of media which could support this kind of interaction, I'm not sure social media is the best format, then this would automatically be considered more credible. Or maybe major media organizations that can act as intermediaries, so maybe, I don't know, newspapers, which have traditionally been a dying model, maybe they're going to come back into fashion. I'm not saying newspapers as in paper format, but, some kind of, let's say, newspaper or news outlet that curates information. I don't know, it's not something I've looked into in depth. It just feels like this whole thing, with fake news is not going away anytime soon. And I guess global geopolitical tensions are only going to increase the level of propaganda as well as fake news. And just some thoughts ahead. I don't know what's your opinion on that and how you think all of these things are interconnected.
I think even misinformation, fake news, propaganda is one of the biggest existential sort of threats we're facing now, right? I think that's clear, because regardless of what you think, feel, or believe around the world, there's one where everyone says, okay, this impacts the whole world at once. But I think that's an interesting idea that you propose of the newer news outlets being more just facts-based driven. Here are the bullet points, this is the events, this is what we can confirm is taking place. But you sort of remove the narrative, that you're not saying one side was right or one was wrong, or one reported this or one reported that. The only issue is just that even when you're reporting facts, in terms of ethics now, is that when there is such a lack of trust, even the epistemology, the root causes, the facts themselves, when you have even independent verifying agencies, people still just don't trust them, because how do I know this really happened anymore? Particularly if it's a filmed event, right? Or recording of someone, and we know there was a recording of someone, let's say, taking a bribe or whatever it was. And it used to be that was okay, that's the accepted fact that this happened. But if that person turns around and goes, that was a deep fake, that never happened, that was AI generated, then you're kind of reporting on, some people say that this is real, he says it's not. And then you see how that twist in the narrative, all of a sudden it looks very 50-50, when maybe it was actually clear cut that this individual did take a bribe.
Yeah. And I think this is going to affect, it's a chain reaction. I don't know, what's going to happen, for example, with information heavy sectors like finance and investing. I don't know.
Oh God, you can just imagine, right? Fake news or propaganda being fed into AI trading algorithms that sort of make mass trades at scale and that can damage markets as a worst case scenario.
Yeah, exactly. But that being said, let's take a step back and talk about AI ethics framework. And I'm really curious to hear your opinion as to whether we're going to see some kind of unified AI ethics framework in the near future. It kind of feels there are many different research groups in the academic and corporate and government sectors working sometimes together, sometimes disjointly. And I'm really curious to see where all of this is going to go. There's going to be regulation at some point. Just don't know, it feels this space is so new. And there was also this summit that Rishi Sunak organized, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago. So I'm not really sure what's the outcome of all that. Honestly, it's that.
This is the thing, right? It's this is what you often get with AI ethics, where people get frustrated because you're telling me all these things that could go wrong, but what's the acceptable standard? And you get all these standard bodies which are doing a good job of putting things together of how to address most common failure modes, or what data sets and everything, and how you should be, sort of statistical tests for bias and fairness. But the issue is when you're trying to do consensus, is a lot of it changes depending on the use case and the industry you're in. For example, AI ethics in the energy industry versus in finance versus in healthcare. Certain trade-offs, even ethically, you have to make. Take the data out of it and just qualitatively, where it's something with privacy and security, when it could literally impact someone's right to life. In a normal scenario, of course, you like favor privacy, but there's certain scenarios where like you go security or safety, right?
Yeah.
So again, these are like really difficult, like ethical decisions that need to be made. But I think there will be consensus forming over like what the issues are, like misinformation and disinformation. The difficulty is that we agree that there are issues and things we need to do, but what do we do next? Like, what are the appropriate standards? How can we make sure that it's harmonized to some degree around the world? Because of course, like ethics changes depending on which culture you're in, which geographical location, what works well in some part of the world probably might not work well in another part of the world either.
Yeah, and you can imagine my frustration as someone who's deeply technical when I'm like, how
For
is
sure.
this going to affect my work? You know, like I've been doing my own research into AI ethics, but most of my work is technical. So I'm constantly like trying to figure out where this is heading to. Like the feeling I get from the market, I think the big companies, they care a lot about this stuff. Looks like smaller companies, at least from what I see in the market, they still completely ignore the whole AI ethics conversation. Maybe because it's not so much of a priority if you're not reached a certain level, a certain scale. What's your impression around that?
I think a lot of it's the framing of like AI ethics, right? Because the broader thing is societal impact and all that sort of stuff. But for companies, it's about protecting reputation, obviously doing the right thing for like society, your employees, because also just makes good business sense. But the other thing, which the framing of like AI ethics, it's almost like we need to start thinking of it more as just like product reviews. And you're just finding new like ways that this product could fail. So let's say you had like, okay, let's take like a seatbelt. The seatbelt works really well for men, but 20% of women, for whatever reason, can't use the seatbelt. Or in the case of like facial recognition, this works really well for everyone that's a white male. If you're a black woman, this doesn't work very well. Your accuracy rates go down to like 60%. Just take the ethics out of that for a second, like even the fact that it's discriminatory, and just say this product that's on the market doesn't work well for this user group. We need to fix this product as soon as possible to reach like a wider target market. And that's what you're trying to do here. So even if you're in a startup, they might think of ethics as this wishy-washy sort of philosophical thing, but you got to look at it as just like product performance. Like, is it actually, in terms of accuracy rates and bias, is this defensible what we're doing? Does this actually work well for everyone in society or not? Or even things over like black box models and explainability. In terms of the product review, if let's say you got an AI chatbot that you ask it one thing and it gives you an output, ask it the same thing again, gives the complete opposite one. What do you think your user is going to feel about that? Over like how much actually wants to use this in future, going actually, it's giving me potentially incorrect information twice. Do I still want to use this as a customer?
Yeah, exactly. But the question is not only whether customers will want to use it, but whether companies themselves will be forced to, undertake certain measures like GDPR. I keep wondering, what if the same thing happens with AI ethics? Like what? The same thing that happened with GDPR, where you have to abide by certain legal regulations. Do you see this happening even like for small companies in the space? Like, or if you're developing a technology in this and that area, then you have to do so on and so forth?
I think we will. Like with the EU AI Act, it's clearly like this is what the attempt's going to be, right? Like GDPR, but for AI, there needs to be bare minimum standards over things like ethical use and product performance and ethical decision making and like documenting this stuff. So in the event that something goes wrong, it needs to be easily discoverable, right?
Yeah.
And like certain use cases that you just can't do because they're prohibited. But again, it comes down to the difficulty is like figuring out what standards are acceptable, like over something like bias and fairness. How representative does a data set really need to be? What's the accepted standard? How much does this change depending on the use case? But for smaller companies, I can understand the frustration because a lot of them have basically said that with emerging regulation, the fear is that they won't be able to innovate because they're not a larger company and they won't be able to have a sort of like even be able to afford like a specialist in AI ethics to come and just basically embed these best practices. So they're kind of like, are we just going to be regulated out of the market? Or what we really need to do is, again, build like international sandboxes and have like even regulatory support for people to innovate safely and to at least support these sorts of companies too.
Yeah, 100%. So what do you think are going to be the next big topics in AI ethics? I feel that framework is going to be one, but I feel this actually will take a few years because it will require many different parties in different countries to reach some kind of consensus. Yeah. But other than that, do you feel that, for example, independent researchers, smaller players in the market, is there anything they can do, or should they just like sit around and wait for something to happen?
Yeah, the thing is, you can't just sit around and wait, because we'll be here for like, who knows how long it'll take for international consensus and standards. Again, you kind of got to start somewhere. If you're researching, I think that it's a good position to be in, because you're free to explore these ideas and actually look at like standards and even build the standards yourself, right? But for industry, even like we should be creating standards ourselves to show like this is the best practices for how all these companies do it. We can reach a consensus to even inform future regulations. So now this is generally what's accepted in industry. Like, what are we missing? What can we do better? Yeah, but I think the key message is you have to be proactive.
So I guess it's not only about being proactive. I guess it's also about being defensive, maybe, for lack of a better term, correct?
Yeah, like you got to think ahead and just have this stuff there and have foresight, because even for companies, it's like before GDPR, right? I think there's a big thing where people didn't really understand like the scale of what this was going to bring for like companies and future compliance programs. So like, oh, okay, the EU is going to do this data protection thing, data privacy thing. Then it comes out and every company's like, oh, okay, this is going to cost so much money to retrofit how we do all this stuff. We're going to need to train everyone up. But if you create standards at your company and have foresight and just think ahead, you basically have like these risk management programs embedded for things like ethics and AI before the regulation occurs. So even when these regulations come up, you're kind of like, okay, we already do this anyways. There might be some tweaks we need to make to our processes, but we're actually okay. The employees know what's expected. We don't need to do some really like costly retrofit. Like we were already doing what they're expecting us to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I guess it's about being somewhat proactive, but obviously there's a bit of, let's say, I don't know what's the right word to use this, but maybe some kind of negative incentive, for lack of a better word, that is, oh, I should do something now because then I might find myself in trouble later. But do you think there's also any positive motivation?
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think this is a big thing for like us in the AI ethics community, sort of, because again, like naturally, we always think of like how things can go wrong and like reputational damage and lawsuits and people being harmed. But there's a huge advantage with actually doing AI ethics for company, even commercially, because I truly believe like it's an enabler for digital transformation if you do it well. If you do ethics well, have transparent communications, even things like AI chatbots. Like if you look at performance risk, right? Like model drift and like the length of your conversation with like an AI chatbot. If you just teach your employees that like, hey, don't go above this length because it's more prone to producing inaccurate outputs, stay within these guardrails, they'll use it better. They'll get better outputs from it. They probably have more confidence to use it. You get faster adoption. And particularly when you work in industries that are like more highly regulated, or there's like, I'm gonna say like averse to innovation, because I think they all want to innovate, but they just recognize that it's not as easy as it might be in some other places. It's really important to like build that trust and confidence.
Yeah. I think actually building this trust and confidence seems to be a recurring theme in many different areas, like with corporate fraud and ethical accountability being big ones. Then I think that there's a lot of room for companies to prove that they actually care. But I guess, AI ethics, and now in this particular case, now we're diverging into other topics. I just feel AI ethics plays a role into this area of what's called like corporate accountability. I think that's like the technical term for it.
Yeah, because I think this is something we're going to start seeing more of. I think as in some of the Nordic countries, they already have some stuff like investor confidence. Like investors want to see, like, can you disclose your AI ethics principles or your company's approach to job displacement and all that sort of stuff that might come from AI, or even sustainable use of AI. So I can foresee in the near future, right, like companies in your annual sustainability reports, all these disclosures, people are going to say, like, I want to see, like, what's your approach to AI safety and ethics? Like, what's your stance? What are your ethical principles and values? Like, what are your best practices and guidelines? Because again, it shows, even for as an investor, right? You're looking at these companies that will do this sort of thing, and it just shows that they're thinking ahead, that they have like a long-term vision for how they're going to use AI. It's not just a hype thing that we're going to get in the news now. It's like, okay, we've got a really long plan, and this is going to be sustained.
Yeah. I completely hear you. Perfect. I think our time is up. Where can our audience learn more about you? Maybe like LinkedIn, if someone wants to connect with you or they have a question.
LinkedIn's a great place to come connect with me. We're always open to building collaborations and speaking with other people. Because one of the key things we're trying to do, it's such a new field, I constantly get asked by people, how do I upskill in AI ethics? What are the job requirements? And even that's a pretty funny one, because you could either be someone like yourself, deeply technical, that learns about ethics, or someone like myself who's more legal in ethics, but learn technical skills. But it's kind of like a job where it's open for anyone, as long as you're willing to learn. It's not a traditional career route, but by building this community, we're actually exchanging a lot of ideas, because it is a new field, but we're learning as we go along with each other. So yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn if you'd like to discuss collaboration or just a general chat.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So thank you, Uthman. It's been a pleasure. And thanks everyone for staying here with us today. Make sure to visit datascientist.com for more content on AI, data science, and Web3. And we hope to see you again in some of our other episodes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to visit thedatascientist.com for more content about data science, AI, and blockchain.